All right. Welcome to Tell Us Something. It's a big night tonight. I appreciate everybody coming out. I've got a lot of stuff to read ahead of time, so listen up. We're proud to open the 15th Annual Festival of the Book. It's a pretty packed weekend, and I know we're all excited about all of the literary events available to us this weekend, so let's give it up for Humanities Montana and Festival of the Book. Tell Us Something is also proud to be part of the Missoula Public Library's Big Read program, and they've asked me to tell you this. Thank you for joining us to take part in the 2014 Big Read. It's Missoula's month-long celebration of Tim O'Brien's The Things We Carried. The Big Read is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest and is designed to revitalize the role of literature in American culture. The Missoula Public Library is one of 77 nonprofit organizations in the country that got a grant to do the Big Read this year. This community-wide effort is made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts and the generous support of Missoula's Big Read partners. Special thanks to our major Big Read partners. Please visit readmissoula.org for a full listing of all of the Big Read partners. The Big Read is truly a community endeavor. There are also evaluation forms, I think, available over here in the corner if you want to drop by and fill one out as you leave. There are also donation jars at the front and the back door. If you enjoy what you're seeing tonight and you want to give us a little bit of support, drop a couple dollars in one of those jars, please. Because of our partnership tonight with the Big Read, the theme of tonight's event is The Things We Carry. We have 11 storytellers. I think all of them are here. One of them hasn't checked in yet, but I think they're all here. And they each have 10 minutes to tell a true story based upon that theme. They're telling that story from memory without any notes. We do this 4 times a year. The next event is in December, and we've already got all of our storytellers lined up for December. It's going to be, the theme is These Dreams, but we are looking for storytellers in February. It's going to be part of the Big Sky Documentary Film Festival, so if you would like to tell a story in February, the theme is adventure. Find us at tellussomething.org and send us an email, and we'll put you on that list. This event will be videotaped by Missoula Community Access Television as part of its Media Assistance Grants program to nonprofit organizations. Oh, and you can see the last Tell Us Something on YouTube. I've embedded it at the tellussomething.org website, so go check that out. You can also subscribe to the podcast. Our first storyteller is Luke Morgan Algayer. Some of you know him. Maybe he served you coffee. He's a barista who likes to dabble in community organizing. He hails from the weird and sunny world of Central Florida and moved to Montana to finish up his undergraduate education. He graduated in 2011 and is currently applying to graduate schools on both ends of the country. In his spare time, he enjoys writing postcards to distant friends. Who writes postcards? He creates meals with nearby friends and makes new friends wherever he can find them. This summer, he has completed a bicycling trip from Vancouver in Canada to Los Angeles in California, and he still has the tan lines to prove it. Please welcome Luke Morgan Algayer.
The adventure begins at midnight in Vancouver. Sam and I, my boyfriend, we have our bikes and everything we need for the next 1,800 miles packed into bags on those bikes. We had just gone through customs where we thoroughly baffled the customs agent by saying, "We're biking from Vancouver to Los Angeles." We then thoroughly baffled her more by saying, we're staying tonight with a stranger on a boat in the harbor that is part of Vancouver. And so we're biking. I had just called that guy, Sean, who we're staying with, and he had the thickest Canadian accent I had ever heard. I said, "Hey, Sean, we're here." And he says to me, "Oh, good. Meet me at the dock. I've got a dog." And so we go to the dock where we're supposed to meet him, and we're waiting for a dinghy, and we see it putting across the little harbor there. And sure enough, he has a dog. He's carrying a dog named Sage with him. And I see this dinghy, and it doesn't look like it can hold our bikes. And so I say to him, "Should we lock our bikes up on the dock or what?" And he says to me, "Oh, no, just hand them down to me." And so we do, and he kind of stacks them on the dinghy. And then there's a little bit of space left, and so I say, "You go ahead and come pick us up later." And he says, No, you get in the boat. There's plenty of room." And we do. We fit 3 men and a dog in the space of where I'm standing. And so that night, we are lulled to sleep by the ebbing tide, and then we wake up the next morning, and we begin our ride. Along the way, we met a lot of people, and they were carrying a lot of things. First, we met Leela, who carried with her an internet access so that we could watch a World Cup game before leaving that morning. Then we met Joe, a friend of ours, who was carrying with him a tarp big enough to cover us the entire campsite that we were at, because that day we had biked for 40 miles completely in the rain. We were drenched, and we were in the middle of the Olympic Peninsula, a place full of dead, sad towns. Unfortunately. And then we met Libby, who brought with her, she carried a casserole that her mother had made, and she allowed us to stay at her beach house in Pacific City, Oregon. And we stayed there for the 4th of July, a time when typically we would not be able to find a campsite because everyone is camping over the 4th of July. And so we stayed for 3 nights at her beach house and watched the fireworks launch over the Pacific Ocean. And we ate that casserole that she carried with her, and it tasted just like home. And then we met a guy who was biking from Seattle to San Diego and then back to Seattle. And he carried with him a cat in a trailer behind his bike. We never learned this man's name, but we learned the name of his cat. His name was Fun Times. And then we met a man that we liked to call Cowboy Nick. Cowboy Nick carried with him a full-size acoustic guitar in a hard-shell case that he hung from the handle on his handlebars. He wore a cowboy hat instead of a helmet, and for breakfast he ate cold hot dogs in warm water with the ramen noodle flavor packets, no noodles. And then we met people like Thomas, who was from Paris. And he carried with him a pack of cigarettes. He was the only person we met who was biking the entire length of the Pacific coast of North America and smoked at least half a pack of cigarettes a day. For breakfast, Thomas would have exactly 1 cigarette. He also carried with him a trailer behind his bike with a lopsided wheel that would go ka-thunk, 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 ka-thunk every time he rode somewhere. And so you always knew Thomas was coming if you were traveling at the same speed as him because you could hear that coming from behind you. And then we met Chuck, who carried with him an iPhone. He carried an iPhone because he had just had heart surgery and he was in his 60s. And he was biking from San Jose to Huntington Beach, California. And his wife had forced him to text him every 2 hours just so that she would know he was still alive. And then we met Doug, who carried with him dehydrated coffee from Italy. And we met Sochi, who carried a ukulele. And we met Daniel, who, because he was biking from Vancouver to San Diego in 20 days, carried practically nothing. And there were some days where I wish that we were carrying practically nothing, because there were some days where we didn't meet anybody, where we were biking 92 miles on accident. And that's not something that's easily done. It was days where we would be at mile 85, and we would see ahead of us just towering hills with no campground in sight. And we would be on a narrow 2-lane road with no shoulder, and on one side a steep cliff up a mountain, and on the other side a steep cliff into the ocean. And it was on roads like this where a man in a giant truck carrying a yacht too big for this highway passed us, flipping us off, because we were on bikes on a road that fit us. And it was on these days when we were tired and hungry and when people were mean that I stopped on the side of the road and I broke down and I cried. And then it would be days like the next day after that when Sam would also break down and start crying, and I would have to force him to eat food because he was hungry and he did not know what to do with himself. And it was these days where we felt alone and like we could barely carry ourselves. But we had to keep telling ourselves that these days, eventually, these days end. And when they end, we meet people like Mike, who carried with him his 2 daughters on a triple tandem bike. It had 3 seats and a trailer attached to it. And they were biking for a week around the Bay Area of California. And we would meet people like them and realize there is still humanity in this world. And what are we all doing but carrying each other? Thank you.
Maybe she served you drinks at the Ritz. Maybe she sold you a house. Maybe you've eaten from one of her beautiful plates or drank from one of her wonderful cups. She teaches children how to make stuff out of clay, and she's all around pretty great. Please welcome Marlise Borchers.
Probably too tall for me. Got to get it down here. So when I go to the dentist, I have to take Valium because I have these unholy panic attacks. And they're spasming and all kinds of nonsense, and they feel just like this. So, thank you. So I'm about 7 years old for this story, and my hair is really, really long. It's almost down to my knees, and really light blonde. And my mom is meticulously curling every strand of it. And this happens whenever we need to be seen, right? You know, there's a holiday, or it's the first day of school, or pictures, or we have to sing Rudolph. In this case, we're going to see my great-grandmother, Anna, and that's a place to be seen. Sorry. I'm not allowed to cut my hair as a child, and that's how it has become so long. And the boys at school tease me, and they pull on it from behind me at my desk, and they close it in the lids of their desk. And one day, when they were pulling my hair, they actually were smashing large pieces of bubble gum into it behind me as I sat there. And this was how I was assured that they really, really liked me. So I sat with my mom, much like when I did when she would do my hair, and she cussed a blue streak and smoked cigarettes and sobbed. And she tried everything that she could to get that out of my hair. And it started with peanut butter and ice and went to baby oil. But what finally did the trick was lighter fluid. I think I told you she was smoking, right? So even I knew that this was a pretty shaky idea, but I did not say anything, and you wouldn't have either. At night, my mom braided my hair so that it wouldn't become one solid tangled mass as I slept. And in the morning, she pulled a brush through it again and softly told me that I had mermaid's hair. As a teenager, I would, in defiance, cut a huge chunk out of my hair, like right here, because I wanted a bob, and I wanted people to stop calling me Crystal Gale. And my mom rushed me to this lady's house who had a beauty shop in her basement. And she rushed me there in the car like I was bleeding out. And when it was all said and done, she made me carry that hair home in a plastic bag and give it to my father, who accepted it without looking at me. And he didn't say a word. And he just went up to the studio and he made paintbrushes from it with carved willow handles and copper wire. And she's done curling my hair now, and it's time to go, and I've got my best tights on, no holes in the knees, I'm all dressed, and we're going to see Grandma Anna. And it's in Belt, Montana, which is like 20 minutes from where I grew up in Great Falls. And this is a little place. So we've got to pick up my grandma, Eva, who is her mother, my mom's mom, and then we're going to see Grandma Anna, who's her mom. And we get there, we pick up Grandma Eva, and we drive all the way across town, which is like 3 or so blocks. And we get to Grandma Anna's house. And Anna had some magic in her. And we knew this because she never guessed any of the babies wrong in our family and like 20-some grandchildren until me. And I'm worried about whether Grandma Anna likes me, and I'm worried about whether or not I wrecked something for her by not being a boy. But her house is really, by all standards, a tiny, tiny shack. But it's honest and it's clean, and she works hard. And the whole deal is that I come and I be seen, and I know I'm supposed to go outside and play and be quiet after that, and that's how it usually goes. And I don't know what kind of business they're conducting in there whatsoever, but I know that I'm supposed to be out playing on the propane tank and minding my own business. I'm a little scared of Grandma Anna because she's really quiet, and I know now that that was because there was a little bit of a language barrier. There was certainly a generation barrier, and she was maybe the oldest thing that I'd ever seen. Her house was as spare as could be, and the only things that I really remember that were decorative was the Last Supper hung on one wall, and then in the other room there was the one of the really good-looking Jesus. And that was it. But the most fascinating part about Grandma Anna's house, and that was consistent with the magic that she already had, was that a whole colony of honeybees had moved into the back wall of our home. And it really was built out of scraps, you guys. I'm not kidding when I say that. And there was no way to remedy this without taking the house down. And when it got really hot outside, as happens in Montana, that wall wept honey and wax. And that's what the room smelled like. And that was the most fascinating part about our house. And we were strictly forbidden from touching the honey wall. So I'm playing outside, and I've been there a while, and I don't know, I need something. And I'm not sure what it was that day, but I know it must have been important because I was breaking the rule of being unheard, unseen, you know. And I went creeping in as quietly as I could because I knew that I wasn't supposed to disturb anything. And the moment that I walked in on has had maybe the most impact on me out of any image in my life. And it was like a big flash bulb went off in my head. And what I walked in on was my grandmother and my mother on either side of Anna. And I forgot to tell you something really important. Her hair was white, so white that you would not be able to even imagine what color her hair had once been. And it was in huge braids coiled on her hair, on either side of her head, the size of dinner plates. And that's important. Because what I walked in on was my mom and my grandmother on either side of her. And they were brushing her hair, and they had washed it. And she was sitting on a step stool between them with her hair let down. They each had a brush, and it was not only so long that it hit the floor, it actually pooled on the floor by their feet. And behind her, the honey wall wept. And she was otherworldly, and she was beautiful. It wasn't a very long time after that day that I went to Belt again with my mom, and we were standing on the sidewalk, and I was really stubborn. I was resisting. And as was generally the case with my mom, I was not going to win. I'd been given the look, and it was over. And so I took her hand, and we walked into the small room on the side of the church in Belt, Montana. And my grandmother, Anna, lied there in a casket that was just half open. And I was terrified. I would still be terrified, you guys. I don't understand this open casket thing. But I was especially terrified then, and I looked at her, and what they had done to her was unforgivable. She was such a plain woman, and she wore sturdy black shoes and a dress and apron, and everything was honest and clean, and they had her with a bright red bow for a mouth and blue eyeshadow, and her hair was waxed right to her head. And she had on this frilly, like chiffon-y, ruffly, bridesmaidsy kind of dress that I couldn't figure out what was going on with. And I remember having a couple of really distinct thoughts at that moment. And one of them was, her shoes must be ridiculous. This is insane. And the other thought that I couldn't get away from that day was that she looked like this really creepy collection of dolls that my friend Corey had, that one was from every culture. And they kept me up at night when I stayed with Corey, because when you tipped them, their eyes opened and closed. And they were all the same size, and they were all from different cultures, and I couldn't figure out what culture they were trying to make her look like she was from. And I could only think that if she could just tip forward a little bit, and if her eyes would open just a touch, somebody would really be in big trouble for hookering her up this way. But really, I just prefer to think of that day when I saw her as a specter in a moment so beautiful that it's a gift to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlise. Finally, Michael Lapointe. He's a photographer, an actor, an educator, and a puppeteer. He laughs at jokes that most would shake their heads at, and he has lived in a handful of states and has an impressive range of odd jobs, but these days he spends his time slinging pizza and hanging out with his pup. He's a happy guy who is full of love and good intentions. It's the Mike Lapointe Show.
All right. Hey. Wow, there's a lot more people in the back than I thought I'd see when I got up here. All right. My story is not unlike Castaway in that there's a package that I carry. A little bit of a spoiler alert here. You know Castaway, when it ends, you don't know what's in the package? I'm going to tell you right now. At the end of my story, I don't know. I don't know what I delivered. I don't know what I carried. But it's who I carried it to that matters. I moved here from Brooklyn, New York, and I gotta take a deep breath here. I moved here from Brooklyn. I lived in this neighborhood called Greenpoint. I couldn't move back into Greenpoint if I wanted to. It's way too expensive and super cool. But when I lived there, it was all Polish people. A Polish restaurant below me, and the neighborhood next door was all Hasidic Jews, and a couple streets down, Italians everywhere. Great people. Great cannolis. So I lived in this apartment with these three great girls, and every time we'd have a problem, like the upstairs apartment got bed bugs, and now suddenly like I got bumped and I'm itching, and we called our landlord, called the landlord's son or cousin. His name's Baccio. We called Baccio, and we're like, Baccio, we got a problem. And he's like, do we have a problem or do you have a problem? And I'm like, whoa. Okay, I have a problem. Look, we have bed bugs. Can you help us out? And he was like, I can help you out, but you know, your rent's pretty cheap right now. And if I take care of that, then I'm going to have to charge you a little more. We're like, okay, we'll take care of it. 3 times. So I collected rent from these 3 lovely ladies I lived with, and I would go bring the rent check down to Baccio at the Italian bakery, probably like 8 blocks away. We didn't write the check to Baccio. We wrote the check to Mario Fortunato. Mario Fortunato was an old man who was in prison, and he was in prison for having someone killed. I told my brother who my landlord was, and he was like, "Do you write a check to that guy? That guy's in jail. It was in the New York Post, you know?" So I, put the checks in my pocket and bike on down, and I'd go into the Italian bakery, and I'd go up to the counter, and some lady would be like, "How can I help you?" I'd be like, "Hey, is Baccio here?" I'd be like, "Yeah, sure." And this guy would come out, "Hey, how can I help you?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, you're not Baccio." And he's like, "Oh, you mean my cousin Baccio?" So then Baccio would come out and be like, "How can I help you?" And I'd be like, "Dude, I've been paying you rent for 3 years. Here it is again." "Oh, sorry, man. Do you need a cappuccino?" "Yes." So things are great in this apartment, and we're hanging out, and I get this package one day. It's in this little cardboard FedEx, like express mail sort of thing, and it's addressed to Mario Fortunato. I don't know how many apartments these guys have. I know they got the bakery. I know that this guy's in prison. I know that there's 2 Baccios. And I listen to it, and I like tilting on one side and something like dugga dugga dugga. I'm like, tilting on dugga 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 dugga. I'm like, do I open it? Do I open it and maybe get killed? Is it like poison or a bomb or a human hand? I don't know. It sits for days. I'm like sniffing it too, like, okay. And eventually I'm like, I gotta get rid of this thing, you know? First of the month comes up, I throw my rent in my pocket, I throw the box in the backpack, and I bike down to the bakery, and I walk in, and I'm like, "Hey, is Baccio here?" This guy comes out, and I'm like, "You're not Baccio." And so the other Baccio comes out, and he's like, "How can I help you?" I'm like, "Dude, it's me again, every month. Here's the rent, and by the way, I've got this package. It's addressed to Mario." And he says, "That's Mario over in the corner." And like straight out of a Sopranos or something, I turn around, and there's like this little sunroom, and in the back corner, there's like 8 dudes with their shirts half unbuttoned and gold chain and gray hair. It's like slicked back, and they're all like kind of shoulders hunched. They're all talking to each other. I'm like, okay, that's Mario. And I walk on over, and I'm standing there, and I'm like way too hip. My pants are rolled up, and I got a hat on. This guy stands up, he's like, can I help you? And I'm like, I'm looking for Mario. And he goes, what business do you have with Mario? I'm like, I've been his tenant for 4 years, and I keep paying him rent. It's a great place, and I got this box addressed to him. And the guy says, this is Mario right here. And in the corner, this tiny guy, this really like, his body was caving in on itself. And he kind of gives me a wave, and I say, oh, sir, thank you so much. The apartment's great, you know. And he kind of doesn't say anything. He just nods. And I like, give the package to the one guy who hands the package to the other guy. And that's it. Turn around and start walking out. And the guy's like, hey, you want a cannoli? Linda, get this kid a cannoli. Hey, Linda, get this kid a cannoli. Come on, kid, get a cannoli. So I get my cannoli and my cappuccino, and I walk out back to my bike. And this is the weirdest part is, I'm sitting there, and I'm unlocking my bike, and I look down the sidewalk, and out comes Mario, I guess, with the package, and he opens a black sedan, and he hands it into the back seat of the sedan, and they close the door. I'm like, what the hell did I just do? What am I part of? Oh, man. And I go home and I tell my brother, and my brother has been living in New York for like 15 years, and he's like, oh, my God, what did you get yourself involved in? You're going to have pocket packages showing up at your house. He's going to be calling you, hey, can you deliver this over to this guy? Like, no. So in the end, I don't know what it was, and I have a lot of things I like to imagine it was, and I hope that all of you can think of something scandalous, you know? But that and a couple other reasons is why I ended up leaving New York and finding a home here for me in Montana.
Thank you, Michael. Jenna, I know you're back there in the hallway. You're coming up. Oh, there you are. Good. Jenna Pinel Lyons was born in Portales, New Mexico. I hope I said that right. And raised in Pocatello, Idaho. She grew up wandering in cowboy boots, running, riding bikes and horses, skate skiing, climbing, and studying classical ballet. She's a scholar of English literature, a former professional ballerina, a poet, painter, photographer, musician, and outdoors woman. A former Snake River hotshot, she plans to attend University of Montana School of Law this coming fall, and she's an avid yogi, a member of Missoula, Montana's Alpha cycling team, and a sponsored ultra marathon runner. Her favorite foods are borscht and any combination of chocolate and cayenne pepper. She loves her boyfriend, chickens, and 2 border collie children. Please welcome Janelle Lyons.
Hi, Missoula. So my story starts, I used to work for an alien. And by alien, I mean this really strong, really enigmatic human being who would make me do things that I never thought I could do. And I call him the alien because sometimes I felt like he would take me to places that looked like outer space. And I really admired this person. He was my hotshot soup. He was in charge of me when I worked for a hotshot crew in Pocatello. His name was Randy, and he is the fastest runner and cyclist, and I really just admire him. The point of this is that when we would run, he would set it up in such a way that it would be the entire crew, which consisted of 20 men and me. And it would always be Randy, and then Dave, and then Josh, and then me behind Josh, and then the rest of the people would fall behind. And it would always be set up in such a way that we would run to the tallest mountain that you could see from the hotshot base in Pocatello. And we would do it as fast as we possibly could with the goal of someone having to puke or poop their pants, or I really think that the alien just wanted to know who was drinking or not the night before, because we would sweat so much that you could tell. You could be like, Josh was drinking, Dave was drinking. I never drank because I was so scared that the alien would know. I'm pretty sure he could tell what I ate or how many cups of coffee I had had that morning. But anyways, we would do this every day when we were training for hotshot season, with the goal of being able to be the best firefighter and not basically die hiking into a fire. And our hikes were the same. We would hike uphill with a weight vest on to the base of the ski hill, and then we'd put our full gear on, which is pack, chainsaw, tool, full camelbacks and Nalgene's full of water, and then it would be a contest to see who could make it to the top. And the goal was to just stay behind Randy, and if you fell out, then basically it just meant failure. So what I would do to survive these, and I really enjoyed this for some reason, during the runs, I would look slightly off of Randy's right ear, like right in the front of the line, and I would just focus on that one point for the whole entire time. And the hikes would be the same. I'd just grab the saw and look right by Randy's right ear the entire time. So fast forward a couple of months, we're in Reserve, New Mexico, which is one of the most terrible places I've ever been in my life. There's 400 people that live there. There's a laundromat, a couple gas stations, a restaurant, a hotel, and a health clinic, kind of. So laying in this hotel, one of the few nights that Randy let us get a hotel, we're waiting for a fire to happen in the area. So if there was a big fire, we'd just go to it and we'd already be there, no big deal. So I'm laying in this hotel room, and I always got my own hotel room because I was the only woman. Laying in this frightening cabin, faux cabin decorated hotel. One of the worst nightmares ever is fake cabin decor. So we're laying there, and I fall asleep enjoying the air conditioning, and we get up to go run the next morning with Randy, and I just have this patch, like this itchy patch right on my left butt cheek. And so I told them about it, and I was like, I think I have bed bugs. And so they complained to the hotel, and then we left, and then Randy made us all wash all our clothes in the laundromat, the entire crew, and then put them in plastic bags to suffocate the bed bugs. So we did that and went on our death run while this was all happening, while the bed bugs were dying. And then we came back, and then we went off to a fire somewhere else. Fast forward a couple weeks again. Completely covered in red bumps everywhere, everywhere on my skin. And so I came to the conclusion that it was probably poison oak. So slathered myself in calamine lotion, waited a day, more bumps came. Slathered myself in aloe vera, next day, more bumps. Slathered myself in Desitin, more bumps. Didn't really occur to me that I might have just needed a shower because, not showering for 2 weeks straight is generally pretty bad for one's hygiene. Basically, I figured I was a walking petri dish at that point. So let's fast forward a couple more months. It's now the end of August. We're in McCall, Idaho at this point. Arnold Schwarzenegger had come to spend some time with the crew to make a documentary about climate change and how fires were getting worse. And I wasn't there because I was dealing with this issue. The worst reason to not meet Arnold Schwarzenegger. So there's things that we carry as firefighters. There's a big pack. It weighs about 45 pounds. In it is a fire shelter, a Camelback full of water. I would carry 2 big Nalgene's full of water, and then a cig full of gasoline and a cig full of oil. A bunch of Cliff Bars, 5-hour energies. I'd always carry a Cosmo magazine, trying to retain some modicum of femininity out there. A safety blanket, a rain jacket, and then on my person I would carry a Leatherman, my book of instructions of what to do if things get really bad, hard hat, compass, a plumb bob, which lets you see if which direction trees are leaning, a tube of red lipstick, a tool. That's what I would carry. But there's one thing that I carried around all summer that I didn't realize I even had until the end of September. And as firefighters, we dig a lot, but there's something else that digs a lot, and that is a scabies mite. So if you don't know what scabies is, it's this terrible little alien creature that digs through your skin or an animal's skin. It can't live without human or animal skin for more than, a few hours, handful of hours. So basically, looking at my skin, I had thousands and thousands of tiny little mite burrows covering my whole entire body. And the thing about scabies that's most terrible is that it's worse at night. I would sit there and scratch and scratch and scratch until I bled, because that's what would make it feel better, is when it would bleed. So finally, one morning, I woke up too tired to work. I went to the hospital. The doctor said it was the worst case of scabies he'd ever seen in 35 years of practicing medicine. And I got a beautiful private flight home from McCall through the White Cloud Mountains, the happiest I'd been in months. And went home, covered myself in not antibiotics, I don't even know what it was, cream for 3 days in quarantine, and basically stayed in my room for 3 days straight until all the scabies were dead. So the moral of the story is, especially with Ebola breaking out, we need to be kind to people regardless of what they are carrying. And that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. So, Kyle McAfee is a 31-year-old American human. He has been performing, writing, filmmaking, and book selling for the past 15 years. Maybe he sold you a book at Fact and Fiction or the Book Exchange. Mostly in Missoula, with the exception of a short stint in Portland and a slightly shorter stint in Brooklyn. Wonder if he knows Baccio or Mario. Dude is also a rapper and a comic book artist, but sometimes too humble to admit it. Please welcome Kyle McAfee.
All right. Great turnout. Almost too many people. If most of you could leave, that would be good to make this a little less intimidating. So it's 2009, and I've moved to Portland with my band and my friends. and I can't get a job. And I'm probably on my 8th interview in a month and a half. And my big break finally is a trial shift at a salon as a receptionist. So, and the way I have to answer the phone is, "Hey, beautiful. Thanks for calling Salon Celeste. How can I make your day wonderful?" So, I haven't gotten the job yet. This is just to see if I'll get the job. So I answer the phone, "Hey, beautiful." I mean, I gave it a little more energy than that, but "Hey, beautiful, thanks for calling Salon Celeste. How can I make your day wonderful?" And the voice on the other end goes, "I'm just trying to find an appointment for my wife." I was like, "Right on, beautiful." But I didn't get that job. And so in the house that I was renting with my bandmates and my friends, there was a studio in the back that this man named Jack rented for his art studio for ceramics. And Jack had mentioned that he did landscaping to make money, and he offered me to do this job with him. And so I agreed to that because I was super desperate. And Jack was nice, but Jack was like this perpetual curmudgeon that wore all denim, and he had like this just shock of gray hair and these huge blue eyes that took up about half of his face, and was always smoking a cigarette, and created the most amazing ceramic stuff I had really seen in a long time. And so I did this job with him, and we had to drive 45 minutes to Longview, Washington from Portland. And it became clear pretty quick that the reason Jack wanted me to do the job was not because of my landscaping experience, which was zero, was to drive for him because he had had his license permanently revoked due to some drinking. And some other things became clear about Jack. He was a former junkie. He had spent some time in prison. And he was pissed off at the world, just pissed. And pissed that he had to do landscaping work to make his artwork. And this job in particular really pissed him off because this guy that we worked for was a doctor and was so meticulous with measurements, and Jack was not. So they kind of butted heads in this horrible passive-aggressive way, and we built this huge patio. It was really beautiful, actually, and we hauled in all this rock, and one of the only times I saw Jack kind of light up was when he got to contribute like a really beautiful piece of his to the job, which was these ceramic masks that were sconces on this kind of outdoor structure, and he kind of was so proud to present them, but at the same time he was like, "But I'm giving them to these fucking people, you know, who don't understand and who only care that it's like 5 inches below the beam, you know, and not what it looks like." And so on that level, Jack and I kind of related because I would like to think of myself as an artist, I guess. And, you know, he was this artist that was existing in his early 50s. And almost over these months of the job, he kind of became this weird, like, quasi-uncle figure, or father figure, because he was kind of right around that age. And it was this bizarro look into what it would be like to have someone who would completely, obviously non-traditional as a human being, as kind of a dad figure. And the reality was pretty bleak because he was just angry all the time. And so I was wary of him, but we had this bond. And I think the only other time I saw him kind of light up was when I showed him some of my art and this animation I had been working on, and he was actually like proud of it. And it was kind of cool, like an older artist recognizing me. And so we had something, but after 3 months of working together, I was ready to be done. After we finish the whole job, we go out on this kind of epic Jack tour of Portland, Oregon, the first place we went was this really upscale bar, and Jack wanted a purple drink that smelled like lavender, and we sit down, and he just like looks around, and he's like, these people don't fucking know. I could be someone important. And I was like, okay. And then he proceeded to find something negative about every single place he was taking me to as like the prime spots in Portland. Like we would go to a jazz bar and I would kind of get into it and Jack would be like, it's only good on Thursdays. And then we went to a blues bar and Jack was like, they don't have their regular bass player with them, so they suck tonight. And the night went on and Jack ended up giving $100 to a homeless girl. And there was this other homeless guy, like, pushing his shopping carts across the road, and Jack was super drunk and was like, I'll help you do that, and grabbed the shopping carts and just kind of ran them across the street. And the homeless guy was like, that's okay. You don't need to do that. But Jack sliced his hand, like, really bad on one of the shopping carts. And he's like, oh, fuck, we got to take care of this because I have Hep C. And which he had contracted, I think, shooting up, and he was bleeding profusely because he was really drunk, and I was pretty drunk too. And we go back into the jazz club because he's like, they know me here, and we cleaned it up and wrapped it in paper towels, and we finally make it back to Jack's apartment at the end of the night, and I'm like so ready to be done with the whole Jack experience. But he wants to sit there and listen to Steely Dan, like, cranked, and just chain smoke, and like, I have more beer. And I'm like, okay. And so, but then he notices on the message machine, there's a message. So he turns down the music and he presses play, and it's from the guy that we did the job for. And he's like, hey, Jack, I'm sorry to bother you, but it looks like the measurement on the sconces was a little bit off, so I'm going to have you come back up here. And Jack just gets so furious, and he like picks up a book and slams it against the wall, and he storms out of the room, and he's just like, fucking Aris, which was the guy's name, and he's just screaming about it. And he kind of takes a couple minutes and he calms down, he comes back in, and he's just like, sorry about that, Kyle. And I'm like, yeah, Mr. Grumpy Pants. And there's like a beat where he stares at me, and I'm totally terrified. And he's just like, I'm not Mr. Grumpy Pants. So that's my story about Jack. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank all of you people for coming out here and listening to his stories. This is awesome. Every time this happens, I'm shocked that people show up. This is great. Thank you. Mela, are you here? Oh, look, there she is. Melissa Bangs is a native Missoulian and a fifth-generation Montanan. In her many years away from Montana, Melissa worked as a labor organizer, a development director of an international human rights organization, and a nonprofit in Mexico, Chile, El Salvador, San Francisco, and New York City. In 2004, Melissa brought her nonprofit consulting business home and worked with well over 100 nonprofit organizations throughout Montana before the birth of her daughter Adelaide in 2012. Currently, Melissa is living two long-term dreams. She's both at home with Adelaide, savoring every moment of these early years, and is one of 9 artists currently represented by Missoula's newest fine art gallery, Radius Gallery, which is also part of the Big Read. Please go check them out when you have time. They have a great show right now. Susan Carlson is in the room, and she's got work in there. Please welcome Melissa Bangs.
Well, I can't see anyone. I was slightly bored with my bio. I'm going to change that up soon. Needs a little more humor, I think. I'm not going to look at the timer again. So there I was, basking in the glory of a near perfect birth experience. My daughter Adelaide had come into the world naturally at home with my husband Eric and our midwife Sandano. And it was just perfect. Now, don't get me wrong, it was the most fucking excruciating thing I have ever experienced in my life. And yet somehow I was able to find my way back to breath again and again and again. I had this idea that although I knew nothing about giving birth to a baby, that my body probably knew something about it, and that if I could manage to just like stay out of my body's way, maybe she'd pull it off. And so I had these ideas like, okay, I'm not going to brace myself or like run from the pain. I'm gonna lean into it. I'm gonna just keep returning to breath. And I had all these mantras to help myself like lean in to the most fucking excruciating thing I've ever felt in my life. And they were mantras like, I am butter. I am elastic. They would have been funnier if I'd said them out loud. I was saying them in my mind, but my vagina is huge. And what do you know? Like 10 hours later, out pops this like beautiful, extraordinary baby, and she's perfect. She's wide-eyed. She's present. She's magnificent. And I have to admit, I got a little cocky. I didn't have one tear. I didn't need one suture, and I thought, whoa, who knew? I mean, I kind of took that like a champ. And I was thinking, you know, well, okay, I know I'm like totally fucking exhausted and I just passed a blood clot the size of a grapefruit, but my vagina is huge. I could not have known in that moment what was coming next. I mean, I know that sleep deprivation is an international form of torture, and anyone sleep deprived long enough will lose their mind. I just couldn't know that 1 month without any deep sleep would constitute enough. So, you know, some people, like, they want to connect with the divine, so they, like, take peyote and wander into the desert with a shaman, or they, like, take a vow of silence and fast for a very long time on a mountaintop. Me, I just decided to give birth at 40 and not sleep for a month, and all of a sudden, I see God in everything. It's like I could see the vibration and hear the tone in every living thing and every inanimate object. And I felt as if I was like this open divine channel to all these cosmic ancient truths, and they were coming through me like wildfire. I couldn't keep up with them. One day I take my husband Eric, I said, babe, there are only ever two choices ever in any given moment in life: love or fear. And I was really excited, like everything was hitting, it was coming so fast. I was so excited, I was like, wow, everything's vibrating, like it's vibrating faster and faster and faster. I think it's all gonna dissolve. I think it's all gonna turn to light. And well, light is love and light is compassion. And I wanted to really share with my beloved that the physical was dissolving and it was just all gonna become love, of course, with the arrival of this magnificent baby. And so I did a bunch of wild things. I did this like piece of naked performance art for him. And it included like drinking the cat water and peeing in the baby swing. And the most magnificent, sort of like the crescendo of the performance, I like threw down a glass and I stepped all over it with my bare feet. Somehow the message of like, babe, it is all love was kind of lost in translation in that final moment. And I find myself in the next moment, cut to next scene, in lockdown at the Providence Center with rock hard triple Ds and mastitis, and I'm just aching to feed my baby. And I am not gonna cry, and I wanted to feed her, I wanted to hold her, I wanted to smell her, I wanted to see her, and I really felt as if my arms had been ripped off my body, or several vital organs just ripped out, and that I really might just bleed out. And with that pain also came just this shame, the shame of abandoning her. I mean, I had never met a being as vulnerable as this little being that came out of me, and I'd never been needed as profoundly as she needed me, and I was just gone. I was so far gone. Thankfully, in my peculiar experience, there was the pain, there was the shame, but with that came these voices, these gentle, loving voices that were kind of always whispering to me, and they'd say things like, there is no right or wrong. It is all about intention. They'd say things like, the past is done, you are forgiven, there is only now, and you are love. And they'd say things like, breathe, Mela, breathe. And when I could listen to them and when I remembered to breathe and I turned to breath, I could have a moment away from just like that agony of missing her and feeling like such a fucking failure as a mom. Like we're a month in and I'd already abandoned my child. And I was allowed in breath and in with these voices, wherever they were coming from, to have some moments in my time at Providence that were quite extraordinary, that were full of wonder and awe and humor and creativity. And I'm going to tell you a few. I remember I believed that everyone's physical flaw was a sign that they too were God. So everyone that come in my room, I'd be like, where's her flaw? Where's her flaw? And there was a nurse who had a wandering eye, and another one whose eyes were like bug-eyed, and another one who had like scars on her neck. I was like, yep, divine, divine, divine. And I had to just like laugh out loud when I realized that the two people that really needed to hear me for me to ever get to go home were my psychiatrist and my social worker, and they both fucking wore hearing aids. I was like, what does that mean? I remember one day sitting in my hospital bed looking out the window, and I laughed about something. In that moment, a gust of wind came up and it like twirled these beautiful, vibrant yellow leaves in this pattern. And the pattern seemed to mimic the pattern of my laugh. And that made me laugh. And then it happened again, and that made me laugh again. And the wind and the tree and the leaves and I went on like that for a while together, just laughing together. I remember one night I played Monopoly with God. There were 4 psych patients and then this male nurse who was in his way. He was so compassionate and loving and funny and smart. And I thought, oh, he's the manifestation of God in the room tonight. There's no doubt about that. And it was so fun, and God and I tied. But not before he agreed to clean up the shanty towns on Mediterranean Baltic Avenue. And I was like, this shit is so cool. Here I am in lockdown in the psych ward. I've lost my mind, and God and I are eradicating poverty. There were several days where I was absolutely convinced that there was a surprise party being planned for me. And I didn't want to ruin the surprise, but I did want to make sure everyone was invited. So There was a rule. I was on the lockdown dangerous side with the real crazies, and I broke this rule. You weren't supposed to go in other patients' rooms, but I wanted to make sure. I broke the rule of going into another patient's rooms like several times to make sure that every one of Mary's personalities had that face-to-face personal invitation to my party. There was one day that Eric was visiting, and I don't know why, but this fear came over me, a very real fear, terror almost, where I thought, you know what, if he leaves, they might not let him back in. I might never see him again. And so I thought, okay, what can I do? What can I do? I'm going to play dead. If I'm dead, he can't leave. So I played dead. And there's a lot of commotion and a lot of people in the room, and people are like, what's going on? And I think, oh God, please don't stick me with a needle. I don't know if I can play dead if you stick me with a needle. And they didn't stick me with a needle, but they took my pulse. My plan was flawed. But while playing dead, still quite beautifully, I realized what a fantastic flaw. I mean, if I were actually dead at some point, they'd bury me. But if I'm in a coma, maybe they'll let him hang out for 10, 20, 30 years. You know, I will never know of the wild, unbelievable experiences I had, perceptions I had, which were the crazy hormone depletion, which was the sleep deprivation, and which was related to any one of the 9 psychotropic drugs I was on in the time that I was there. What I do know is that after almost a month, my psychiatrist decided it was time to go home. Diagnosis, bipolar. Medication, lithium. Status, stabilized. And they told me before I went home, if you don't want to end up back in here, you have to sleep. Well, within a few days home, insomnia sets in, and I can't sleep, and I'm terrified. And then I start having anxiety attacks, many of them. And accompanying that little beautiful band is lithium, which had many side effects, but the most painful or the hardest for me to grapple with was this absolute emotional flattening, this detachment where I knew that I loved Adelaide, but I couldn't feel it. And I had been told that if I were ever to go off the lithium, I would end up back in the psych ward and I would likely hurt Adelaide. And that idea that I could ever hurt her in any mental state was so devastating for me. It really stripped me of my sense of self, and I was paralyzed in that place for quite a long time. Well, I say a long time. It was less than a week where I was just paralyzed, and then I remembered to breathe. I took a bunch of deep breaths and just found this place in stillness, and at some point I felt like I was almost knocked over the head with my sense of self, and I said, wait a minute. I know who I am. I'm Mela Banks. I'm one of the most grounded people I know. I've never had depression, mania, insomnia. I've never even had a fucking panic attack. I mean, I gave birth to a baby at 40 and didn't sleep for a month. I thought, there's got to be another answer. And so that started a series of conversations with my Aunt Dorothy, who was a psych nurse for 40 years and a trusted colleague of hers. And they decided, in their opinion, that I was not bipolar, that I was experiencing postpartum psychosis mania. And I really resonated with that. And so I went to find another way, and my midwife introduced me to a naturopath who's amazing, Dr. Christine White, amazing here in Missoula. And she did a hormone panel. And I was bankrupt of progesterone, estrogen, serotonin, melatonin, dopamine. But I was flying with testosterone, adrenaline, and cortisol. And she said, well, this explains it, you know. She's like, I don't know how you got out of bed today. I don't know how you slept. I don't know how you got out of bed today. I don't know how you dressed yourself. I do not know how you drove yourself here. You should not be functioning. She said, this hormonal picture gives you a heightened sense of sight, hearing, smell to see the tiger in the jungle, and you have none of the hormones to figure out what the fuck to do about the fact you just saw a tiger. Amazingly, the regimen she put me on, within 3 weeks, my insomnia, my anxiety attacks faded to nothing, and all that was left was this detachment. And again, returned to breath, got really quiet, and my truth was very clear. It was not in me to live my life in fear and raise Adelaide not feeling love for her, so I went off lithium. And that was almost 2 years ago now. And I have not had a repeat symptom. Yeah. And, you know, every once in a while, life just kicks your ass. And the bottom drops out. And I find for me in these few experiences that there's like this sense of free fall where you realize at some point, like, oh my God, I have no control. And that there is no way around this experience but through this experience. And you know, the same was true in birth, that was true in madness for me, which was I had to just surrender, completely surrender, and remember to breathe. And at some point in that, I was met with this profound beauty and this wisdom in me that was far beyond my thinking brain, came from someplace else, that little by little guided me back to wholeness. And, you know, for me and my huge bipolar vagina, we're really clear about, you know, in life, there are only ever two choices in every given moment, and we choose love. Thank you.
Thank you, Mela. Jim Ambrose has been an advocate for a child's right to self-determination since 1998. Jim Ambrose has been an advocate for a child's right to self-determination since 1998. His activism has been featured in diverse publications and programs including CNN, The New Yorker, and Montana Public Radio. Originally from South Louisiana, Jim works as an editor and writer in Missoula. Please welcome Jim Ambrose.
So, I worked as a bicycle messenger in San Francisco from 1999 to 2001. And my first job was this big company. It was called Western. You know, we ship everything, and half of our people are cyclists. And I had been working there for about, I don't know, about 6 months, and still very, very green. Still didn't go anywhere without my San Francisco cross street directory. And, but what was really, really clear early on was that the drinking culture in the messenger community was pretty intense. I guess you could have guessed that. I should have guessed that. But every night after work, we'd gather in front, 75 Columbia Circle, and drink, and hang out, and pretend like consequences didn't exist of any sort. And somebody suggested we go to the Messenger Bar, which was called The Tempest. And I don't even know if it exists anymore, probably not. But so we all hop on our little bicycles and get on the street, take a ride on Folsom. And it was already dark by then. And we were in our little pack, and I was in the back, and none of us were wearing flashing lights or helmets like responsible bicycle owners and operators. No. But it didn't really matter for them because I was the one that she didn't see. And, you know, the whole cliche about when something seriously traumatic happens in your life happens in slow motion, I'm going to confess to all of you, it's so true. I hate that. And all I saw was this hulking mass coming at me from the left. And it didn't even occur to me that it was a car until I heard the front part of the frame of my bike crank, like crumple under it. And I remember hitting the ground really hard in the middle of Folsom, and I'd lost the wind. Was knocked out of me, and I remember I heard myself gasping, just barely audibly, just saying, "I can make it. Don't leave without me." And then I was gone. And the next thing I remember, for some reason, I'm back in South Louisiana, and I'm looking down in the middle of Midtown in New Orleans, and I'm walking with my sister. We're just strolling in the middle of the street like you do in the middle of the summer. And it occurred to me, wow, that's me, and that's my sister. And if that's me down there, who's watching us? And right when I'd finished that full of thought, this skinny, hairy, mongrelly boy named Dirty Bird was sort of shaking me by my shirt, and I was on my back, and there was a big white light, which was, of course, the ambulance. And he's like, "Hey, you all right? You all right?" And I didn't say anything, and they were cutting my pants off, and I froze. It was such a weird thing to wake up to. I mean, having your pants cut off you. But especially since I didn't really think I was maybe not that hurt. That was until I heard the woman screaming about 20 feet away. I never saw her. I don't know what she looks like. I don't know what her name was. But she was shrieking as if she'd murdered someone. And the worst thing about it was that there were muffles. There were muffled screams. There was somebody with her trying to keep her calm. She was screaming, "What did I do? What did I do?" And because I still wasn't moving. I mean, she wasn't sure I was awake. Anyway, they put me in the ambulance. We scoot on over to San Francisco General, which is a sprawling mass of brick hospital, ancient hospital. Go into the emergency room, and the first question is this tall doctor. I guess they were all tall. I was on my back, but. He said, "How much have you had to drink tonight?" Like he was my dad, but like a dispassionate dad, but enough that I thought, oh fuck, I'm gonna be the one responsible for this whole fiasco. So I just said, a reasonable amount, I know those are the words I said. I'm sure I wasn't that demonstrative. Anyway, so they put me on the side, and I realized that I was being triaged. And I thought to myself, maybe I'm not so damaged tonight. And so it was then that it occurred to me that I didn't have my messenger bag on my back. That thing that I had on me more often than I had off me, that I felt like I slept in, I felt like I lived in it. I mean, I know exactly what I was carrying that night because it was what I was carrying the whole 6 months, and it was what I was carrying the rest of the 2 years that I was a messenger. I had the cross-read directory, of course, because I was always fucking lost. I was not very good. I'm telling everyone that. I was very fast, but I was not very good. I had a bag of shitty tobacco to roll my shitty flaccid cigarettes. I had a couple of tires and tubes and patch kit and lighters and a book. I remember it was The Politics of Women's Biology. I remember because the cover got ripped off. And I And there are also sunglasses and gloves and 2 unopened letters from my mom. And so I'm lying there staring at the ceiling, and then she appears. Not my mom, but a nun. A nun. Whenever I tell a story, I just hit this part, and I'm like, a nun. Habit, the dress, the whole production. So, you know, I didn't see her approach or anything. I just remember her just being there. And I was like, God, this is so dramatic. God. And she was striking. She was really striking. She looked like, Audrey Hepburn would have looked like if Audrey Hepburn had started a 2-pack-a-day habit at the age of 6. Nonetheless striking. She gave me a gentle little smile. And I felt cornered. And she asked me what I was doing there that night. I said, I think I got hit by a car. And she said, was anyone hurt? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. And she said, are you hurt? And I said, I don't know. Even though I had this piercing pain in my hip, which is where I ended up landing. So she said, why did you move to California? And I don't remember saying I was from South Louisiana, which made the whole experience that much more ethereal, just, why did you move here? And I said, I came here to be an advocate for children and their families, and start to participate in a really important political movement and personal movement and stuff like that. And she said, well, what do you do? What did you want to do with these kids? And I said, well, I wanted to work with them and talk with them and be a grown-up that will not only listen to them, but really relay how scared they are and how legitimate their fears are to their parents and their doctors who really can't see that in them. And she said, so what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you actually doing with your activism? And I said, well, now I'm just doing a lot of speaking and writing. And she said, which one do you do more of? And I said, speaking. And she said, why is that? And I said, because the writing is so hard. And she said, I was expecting some sympathetic, shake of the head or a nod or even a kind smile, and I got nothing. She stonewalled me. And I mean, this should not be a vivid memory, but it really is. But I'm telling you, the Nun production really drove it home. Like the whole severity of it was really intense. So she said, you don't have anybody here for you in the hospital? And I said, probably not. I gave a moment's thought to Dirty Bird, but I don't think we were that close. And she said, how afraid are you tonight, right now? And I said, I'm all right, I mean, these penetrating questions are not helping, right? I'm really fucking tired, and I'm just got hit by a car, and I'm still drunk, and there's a nun lording over me. Audrey. And she said, so they're going to let you go tonight, go home. And I said, yeah. And she said, I would really like you to do a couple of things for me. Go home and take care of yourself. Because there's, plainly no one is here for you. And maybe I'm putting more emphasis on the no one part, because she's, she didn't strike me as terribly fatalistic. Terribly. But she said, go home and sleep and be gentle with yourself and be kind. And then when you wake up tomorrow, ask yourself, why were you in an emergency room last night? And then when you think you've answered that, acknowledge that your work is right there and ask, why aren't you doing your work?
Jim Ambrose, he gets me every time. Thanks, Jim. We have another Southerner coming up, Frances Scott. She grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. One summer during her college years, she came to visit her brother, who was a professor at the University of Montana. Daily visits to swimming holes and trips to Glacier, eating flathead cherries along the way, convinced Frances to move to Missoula in 1981 and finish college at the University of Montana. She lived here until 1987 and had wanted to move back ever since she left. She moved back a few years ago and is happy to feel such a sense of place. Please welcome Frances Scott.
Yeah, I was looking at that going, I'm not. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for fixing that, Mark. And thank you for putting all of this together. It's really a wonderful thing for this community. So if any of you have not ever been to the South, I suggest that you go in the springtime. It's absolutely gorgeous there. The dogwoods are blooming, the azaleas, the daffodils, tons of flowers are blooming, the songbirds are singing, and the air is light as opposed to the hot, heavy, humid summer air. So it just so happened, I did grow up in the South, in Jackson, Mississippi, as a matter of fact, and left during my college years. But in 1996, I found myself back there. The entire family was there. My two older sisters, an older brother, and my daughter, and my siblings' children as well. We were at my parents' house, and each of us went about the task of finding something that each of us would carry across the street to the Episcopal Church that we grew up in. I chose a black and white photograph of my father with his belly sticking out, talking on a payphone, and right across was my toddler daughter talking on the other payphone, mimicking him. It was really precious. I chose that along with the sprig from my father's favorite dogwood tree. Each of my sisters chose something that was meaningful to them, and my father's best friend, DT, chose my father's favorite fishing rod that he used when the two of them would go fishing, one of his favorite activities. And my older brother chose my father's favorite shotgun that he used for duck hunting, another one of his favorite activities. So we proceeded as a parade across the street to the church. We're holding hands, hugging, laughing and crying. And we walk through the front door of the church and proceed down the aisle before anyone else is there. And we all walk up to my father's open casket and put each of these items in there with him. Just a few days earlier, back in Eugene, Oregon, where I was living at the time, and my older sister and her family lived there too, it was the beginning of spring break, the last day of school in the afternoon. Beautiful there as well, actually. I was at my kitchen window and looked out, and I saw my older sister and her 9-year-old son walking up to the house, and I was thinking, oh, great, because I love spontaneous visits. So they come up to the back door, and I open the door, and my sister holds me so tight around the neck, and my 9-year-old nephew is squeezing me tight around the waist. My sister is crying and says, Daddy is dead. He shot himself in the backyard today. I was shocked. I was surprised I was shocked because my father had dealt with 2 illnesses most of his life, alcoholism and bipolarism. And what I remember from that, I certainly remember his drunkenness, and his manic depression, what I remember were the manic stages. He came home with a brand new Mercedes. He might whisk Mom off on some grand trip. So I don't remember the depression, though. That was something I never, and I certainly don't remember being afraid that he would commit suicide. And for a while, we grew up in an affluent household. My father was the president of a savings and loan. And somewhere in the middle years of his life, he was asked to resign from that position because of his erratic behavior from either one of his diseases. That, needless to say, was quite humbling. And he handled it with some kind of grace, though. So at that time, he and my mom decided to open up a lamp store, and it was an old house. My other siblings had gone to college, so I lived upstairs with them. So needless to say, it was a humble life. So, excuse me. Once we all gathered, though, down in Jackson, my sister and I flew down with our children, and my older sister were there. It was absolutely amazing, the warmth that we felt. It was like no need had to be worried about by us. We had so many honey-baked hams, caramel cakes. Somebody even brought toilet paper. So we joked that we needed to write a book on how to do funerals because, really, Southerners know how to do it. And I had people show up that I had forgotten about from my childhood. It was pretty remarkable. Now, I do want to say that my mother now, through all of this, our growing up and all of that, she was your classic codependent and the queen of denial. It was her job to make sure that we looked normal and everything was okay. It worked for her, you know, that was her survival. So here we are in Mississippi, and we have to wait a few days to have the service because my older brother happened to be out of the country when all this occurred. So my mom, I just want to say something about my father, though, because I do want to say that when he wasn't wrapped up in either one of his diseases, he was absolutely charming and hysterical. My friends all loved him. They remember him giggling. In fact, I remembered a joke just a little while ago that he used to love to tell. And he and his best friend loved to banter and give each other trouble. And he would say to his friend, you know, you remind me of that joke about Leroy. You know about Leroy? Well, he just had a terrible time. He lost his job. His wife left him. His house burned down. So Leroy said, God, what is the deal? What is going on? And God said, I don't know, Leroy. There's just something about you that just pisses me off. So, you know, there's a little taste of my father. So here we are. Okay, so we're back in Mississippi waiting for my brother to show up to do the services. It's still beautiful. It was beautiful the whole time we were there. And Mom asked my sisters and I to go out to the cemetery and pick out which plot from the family plots would be Daddy's. And of course, she didn't want to go because reality's not her thing. And we are getting in the car, my two older sisters and I, and we realize we're going to be crying. And we don't have any Kleenex. So Victoria, my older sister, runs in the house looking for Kleenex, and she can't find any. But lo and behold, she comes out carrying high above her head a roll of toilet paper. I found something, and Mama's right behind her waving goodbye at the front door, and she says, "Children, what are you doing with that roll of toilet paper? What will the neighbors think?" At which point, our laughter, including my mother's, was carried throughout the neighborhood when one of us remarked, "Mama, I think Daddy's already blown it with the neighbors."
Thank you, Francis. Jeremy N. Smith has written for Gourmet, Savour, the Christian Science Monitor, the Chicago Tribune, Montana Magazine, and Discover, among many other publications. His first book, Growing a Garden City, was one of Booklist's top 10 books on the environment for 2011. His new book, Epic Measures, about the largest study of human health ever undertaken, will be published next spring by HarperCollins. He lives in the Lower Rattlesnake neighborhood with his wife, Chrissy, niece, Haley, and 4-year-old daughter, Rasa. Please welcome Jeremy Smith.
I traveled in Europe for a year after I graduated from college. And when I left to go on that trip, I had a backpack that I put 2 pairs of pants, 2 shirts, socks, underwear, toothbrush, and a tuxedo. Because my mother told me, "You're going to Oxford, and in Oxford there are balls, and to balls one must wear a tuxedo." And she was right. Of all the places I was going, I was aimed toward Oxford because my girlfriend had just a few months earlier won a Rhodes Scholarship, which is one of the top academic awards you can get. Like 30 people in the country get it, of all graduating seniors in college. And it pays for 3 years of graduate school at Oxford, all expenses paid. And so I had scrambled. After she won that, we had dated long distance. We were not at the same college. We were thousands of miles apart. And we had dated long distance for 4 years, and I didn't want to stay long distance for 7 years. So I just applied to anything and everything I could to get across the ocean. And I got a crazy scholarship, you won't believe it, but it paid me to travel in Europe for a year. Poor me, poor me. There were requirements. I was not allowed to have a job or enroll in any institution of formal study. So I land in London. Look it up, Henry Russell Shaw Fellowship. It was on my business card. Okay. I land in London. I take a bus to Oxford. I get there. She greets me. And she says, "You know, I don't think we should live together. You know, I don't think we should necessarily like see each other that often. You know, we've done the long distance thing for so long. It's just a lot to go from almost nothing to everything." Okay. And I check my email the next day, and I get a message from my friend Paul, who has just been fired from his job at a .com in San Francisco. and he is celebrating, or if you call it that, he is using his entire severance package to throw a formal dinner party in Amsterdam. My mother is a genius. Black tie. I take the train across England, through the Channel Tunnel into France, Belgium, Amsterdam. 24 hours later, the entire time, of course, I've worn my tuxedo because you don't want it to wrinkle. And I get there. Paul's at the train station on one of those big Dutch bikes. He says, "Get on the back, James Bond." We ride to his apartment, and not his apartment, the apartment of a friend he was crashing in. And it is filled with like Noah's Ark worth of food. It's just every fancy, amazing cheese, meat, vegetable of every color, shape, size, whatever. And it's like 5 hours till dinner. And he says, "You're making this, 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 and this." And he's bookmarked the pages in a book. I have never cooked in my life. And I start looking. It's a book. I've never read a cookbook. It says Essentials of Classic Italian Cooking by Marcella Hazan. It's got like a white-haired lady with a wooden spoon on the sort of side. And I start reading. And these three words, it says always, only, at least, all the time in this book. Always start the onions before the garlic and the saute or you'll ruin it. Only use Parmigiano Reggiano cheese, not just something called Parmesan. Soak the zucchini at least 30 minutes to remove any impurities before trying to use a zucchini for anything. Okay, so recipe 1 is like a stuffed spinach pasta with ricotta cheese, ham. There's like nutmeg somewhere, chard, and it's 10 pages long, the recipe. Well, I turn around, Paul's chopping, dicing, cooking, baking, whatever. Okay, so just step 1, make the pasta. Refer, 30 pages, there's 30 pages in a different chapter how to make the pasta. And it's like, make the pasta. I mean, it's like, to start with the spinach, I'm literally elbow deep with flour in just a few minutes, okay? Beating the eggs in, and time passes, I'm immersed. People start coming in, beers are cracked, backs are slapped, people are calling me chefy. I've got an apron over my tuxedo, and I'm cooking this, that, and the other, and it's proceeding, and it's amazing. And at the very end, this dish is like a Yule log or something, and it's wrapped in cheesecloth. At the very end, this pasta that's been stuffed with all these things, and then that's like dropped like Jacques Cousteau into this boiling water. And we took it up, and it's midnight when it's unfurled, and the steam and the cheers. And I'm with friends, and it's a transformative moment. And I go back the next day. Party's over. And I get there, and I check in with my girlfriend, and she feels the same way she felt before my transformative moment. She has not had a transformative moment. And so, okay, I've got this I'm actually going to travel on my traveling fellowship. And I hang up my tuxedo in her closet, and I take my backpack with my shirts and pants and shorts and toothbrush, and I go to the bookstore, and I get Essentials of Classic Italian Cooking by Marcella Hazan, and I start carrying that instead of the tuxedo. I go to France, and I'm, baking zucchini, and I go to Italy, and I'm making pizzas and, spaghetti carbonara. I, I meant to spend a week. The ferry gets wrecked with bad weather, and I'm stuck in the island of Santorini, the southernmost island of the Aegean Sea, for like 3 extra weeks with like 3 Argentinians. We're the only tourists on the island, and I'm making like ossobuco, and I'm telling stories from Marcella Hazan, Essentials of Classic Italian Cooking by Marcella Hazan, and I'm telling people why they should never use a garlic press, and how, if you don't have canned, tinned, imported San Marzano tomatoes, who are you? And a year passes in this fashion, and I at the end, I go home. And now I have a long-distance relationship, and we are very good at a long-distance relationship. And at the end of this summer that I've been home, we've been doing the email, okay, I'm going to go back. It's going to work. We've been fools. We're great together. I get a one-way, we're going to get an apartment together in Oxford. She's moving out of the dorms. I get a one-way ticket, and I fly across with my backpack. And I get there, and I land in London. I take the bus, and I get out, and she greets me, and she says, I don't think this is a very good idea. So I say, well, you're splitting the ticket home with me. And putting our money together, we find a ticket that's like the first ticket we can afford is in a week. And I have a week in her apartment. She goes to class. I watch TV, I read, and I cook. And I've got all the time in the world. I want an eggplant Parmesan sandwich. Okay, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, it's 6 o'clock at night, I take the eggplant, I salt it, I bread it, I saute it, I chop in the tomatoes, I'm getting the right cheeses. It's midnight. Okay, I got that, it's pulling out of the oven. Okay, now I got to make the bread because I want a sandwich. I get the olive oil, I get the flour, always only at least kind of flour, of course. And I make the bread, and, it's 6 in the morning. I got to let it cool, at least half an hour. And, I slice it, I eat it while watching television. It takes 5 minutes. And then I'm like, oh, what am I going to have for dessert? And that's the next 12 hours. So my girlfriend comes in last day, and I pull in like an olive oil bread, whole wheat olive oil bread out of the oven. She goes, ooh, warm bread. And she cuts it and puts butter on it. You're supposed to let it sit at least half an hour. But she doesn't know that. She doesn't do it. And I watched the butter melt, and I could say that was my heart, right? And, that's not true, because here I am 13 years later. But, it felt like that at the time. So, you can lose your backpack. And you can outgrow your tuxedo, and you can even have a cookbook that gets kind of worn to shreds. And you can't use that too much anymore. But, I knew those recipes now. I had them with me. I had spent a year cooking them over and over and over. And I could make them for new friends. I could make them for new girlfriends. I could make them for my eventual wife, and now for our 4-year-old daughter. And, I think those are the most precious things we carry, the ones that are, no one can take with us because we know them by heart. And I think they're the most delicious ones as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right, Tamara, are you ready? Tamara Love is a writer, teacher, and lover of arts. She's a fan of rivers and lakes, though not necessarily being in them. She's worked as a grant writer and a program director and has taught composition and creative writing at the University of Montana, Missoula College. She currently works retail to support her writing habit and her 2 canine companions that adopted her. She lives in Missoula, Montana. Please welcome Tamara Love.
Go ahead, kill me if you want to. These words are being hurled at me from my grandmother, who is 86 years old, and she's standing down the hall. And she's looking at me, and she's inviting me to go ahead and kill her. So it's 2004, January, and I have returned to Michigan to take care of my grandmother. And clearly, it's not going that well. So I end up in Michigan because, well, there's three factors. For the past several months, my grandmother had been calling me and telling me that each time I talked to her, she would say, well, I don't think I'm going to last very long. This may be the last week. You should come home and you should take care of me. And so this went on for several months. And then eventually I get a call from one of our family friends who's a bit more credible. And she says, your grandmother's not eating. So my grandmother had stopped eating anything other than really saltine crackers. And she had also gotten sick. So she had like some sort of virus and was losing weight. So she's like, well, I'm not sure, how she's doing, and I think you should come home. And I considered it, and I stayed where I was. And then finally I get a call from my older brother. And my older brother says, hey, I volunteered to go to Iraq. So you're going to need to come home and take care of Grandma. And I'm like, great. So clearly you can't take Grandma with you, so I guess I am going to have to come to Michigan. So that is how I end up in Michigan in January of 2004. Now, I was a bit resentful because, one, it's like, who volunteers to go be near roadside bombs? Like, who does that? Apparently my older brother. So, because he was going to Iraq. And then I was also resentful because I was like, my mother had died early, so it's like, and this was her mother, and I thought, this should be your problem. You're supposed to be here dealing with this, and this is how, I'll be honest, that's how I saw it at that point. And, but she had died and had kind of squirmed her way out of it, so it was, so it was left to my older brother and I. And I had a younger brother, but dying, right? Who does that? But I had a younger brother, and he was like too young to be of much use. I mean, he was like 8 years younger. So it was my older brother and I, and so we had durable power of attorney, and so like I could be there and I could take care of medical things and financial things and all that good stuff. And then my final resentment. So I had, like I said, 3 resentments, and my final one was that I get there, and she's not dying. Clearly not going anywhere anytime soon. And I'm like, you have all these people fooled. So, I'm kind of there like a reticent adolescent teenager, who's in her 30s, and not wanting to be there. And so we get to this moment of, go ahead and kill me. And, I'm not going to kill my grandmother, although I thought about it a few times. But, so clearly we're having some challenges. But eventually, I do manage to, get my head out of my own ass, because that was basically what it was. And I'm like, okay, well, since I am going to be here, what can I do? But before I get to that part, it's like I should tell you a few things about my grandmother. So my grandmother, well, she was a religious woman, and so she had taught Bible school, she taught Sunday school, she and as a kid, she was that person that I always loved when Grandma showed up, because Grandma would come, and there were always gifts. And at Christmas time, my mother would get frustrated because my grandmother would show up with too many gifts according to her. Of course, they were perfect for us. And then, you know, and she also, like, she was supportive when I went off to college. She helped pay for school initially. But then as I got older, and really once my mother passed, things kind of changed, because my mother had been the only child, and then I was the only girl, so sort of some of the things that transferred from, you know, my mother transferred to me. And one of our first, I guess, challenging moments was when I changed my major. When I entered college, I had been a pre-med major. So, but then I was changing my major to become a social worker. And so my grandmother's words were, "You have failed yourself, you have failed God, and you have failed me." So, this sort of wind beneath my wings was who I was going to live with for the next 7 months. But she, you know, so it was a complicated relationship. But like I said, I did manage, you know, to kind of get my head out of my butt, and I moved forward. So the one thing I thought about once I did that was, well, what can I leave for her? You know, what can be sort of a lasting thing? And I should tell you too, so my grandmother, she did have some health issues, which when I had been there the summer before, like found out that she had like a heart murmur, she had, you know, high blood pressure, she had cataracts in both eyes and glaucoma, and insisted on driving. And at night, which was not helpful. And then finally, when I was with her that previous summer, she had also been diagnosed as possibly having Alzheimer's. So this was causing some challenges as far as like remembering to take medication, just remembering things in general. Like she clearly needed someone to be with her. I just wasn't necessarily convinced that that person was me. So that was, you know, the state of her health. But what I decided in terms of like, well, what could I leave for her? I thought, you know, for years we'd been trying to get my grandmother to clean up her house. And I'm sure many of you can relate to having elder parents who you're like, gosh, I hope you deal with that stuff before you die, because we don't want to have to deal with it. So we had, like, for years, and even my mother, when she was living, had been trying to get my grandmother to kind of get rid of some of this stuff. And so, but my grandmother had grown up, you know, she had been through the Depression. She had raised her child by herself. She had grown up, you know, in poverty. She had been the child of a sharecropper. You know, so she was used to, like, for her, she's like, well, someone might be able to use that. And people from church and the community would always bring her stuff, which was horrible, because she would keep everything. And so, but I thought, well, one thing I could do is maybe clear out some things. And so one of the projects that I took on was actually her bedroom. And I thought, well, this would be a great Mother's Day present. And so, I commenced. And in the process of doing so, you know, I found, you know, so this is 2004, and so I found, you know, programs from like 1952, you know, where she had done a Women's Day thing, and it wouldn't be just like one program. She'd have like 10 of them in case she wanted to like share them with other people. And so, you know, and there were Bible, you know, that she had devotionals, and I mean, there's just, you know, and multiple Bibles. I mean, there's just, and then clothes like everywhere. And then she had like more than 200 hats. So, you know, so I commenced to just trying to put some order to this. And also just to kind of, my intention was to create a space that since she clearly was going to be spending a lot more time just in her room because she wasn't just moving around as much, but to create a space that she would want to be in. So there was definitely a negotiation process because, you know, she liked to keep things. We might think of it as hoarding, but she would just say, you know, she was a saver. So, you know, I'd be like, you know, you've got a couple copies, you know, or 3 copies of this book. Well, maybe you could just keep one. Well, but what if I want to use that book for something, you know? And it'd be like, well, but we can maybe store it in the basement or give it to someone who might actually read it. Because when was the last time you read this? You know, it's like, you know, so it's like back and forth with multiple things. So there were books, and then there were the tracts, and then there were the clothes, and then there were the hats. But the one thing that she also saved which I'm sure she would not appreciate me sharing with you, where she had reached a point of being incontinent, and so she would, but she was concerned that she wouldn't have enough of these, of the pads and so, but although she had we had purchased several packages of them, so she would never run out, but she insisted, and so when I was cleaning, I would find them tucked away in drawers and so forth, and it's and so, and I would get rid of them. She's like, why are you getting rid of them? Because you've got 200 new ones, so, but I also could, from my perspective, it was clearly we're going to take care and make sure you don't need this. But for her, as an independent woman, growing up all that time, it's and being on her own, it's for her, it was well, this is how I take care of myself. This is how I ensure that and I began to get that, after a while. But it was definitely this sort of ongoing battle. But I did eventually, over a couple days, I finished her bedroom, and I extracted 26 large bags of garbage from her room that I tossed in addition, and then there were some things I put in the basement. Like I said, it was a negotiation. And I remember I was so proud, because it was this is going to feel great. I got new curtains, new shades, new rugs for the floor. And so, but I had kept her out of the room at some point because she was kind of holding up the process. And so when she comes in, though, the first thing she says, did you throw away too much? And I was like, no, you still got, there's still things downstairs. But, but my other concern, too, though, had been, will they take the garbage? Because 26 bags of garbage, usually you would need to take to a dump or get a dumpster or something. But gratefully, that morning, they pulled up and they took all 26 bags. I was like, awesome. Please carry that away. But the thing, so eventually, after, I was there for about 7 months, and my brother eventually, he comes back, and I leave. But the thing that I carry with me, because I never lived with my grandmother as a kid, but I have to say, despite the challenges we had at the beginning, I so appreciate that I got that time and got to know her during that space when we were together. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. We have one more storyteller, but before I introduce him, I want to thank all of you really for coming out tonight. It's so awesome that you all come out. And you're so attentive, and you're so engaged. It's so great to see everybody out here. I'm in love with all of you. And thank you to the Top Hat and all of its staff for busting their ass every time this happens. They really, really are awesome. So thanks to the Top Hat and all the staff here. Thank you to the bookstore at the University of Montana, Fact and Fiction, Rockin' Rudy's, Haley Faust, who made these awesome posters, Zoo City Apparel, who printed them by hand, limited edition of 100. Also to the Missoula Public Library and the Big Read, Humanities Montana and the Festival of the Book, and every single storyteller that has been up on that stage. Thank you so much. And we podcast this. If you don't know about the podcast, we've got 3 years worth of stories. Over 100 storytellers have been up here. We have 3 years worth of stories that you can go and listen to. You can subscribe to the podcast with your favorite podcatcher. You can listen to it for free on the tellussomething.org website. You can find us on Facebook. That's where a good place to get news, and like us on the Twitters. Twitters. think that's about it. Oh, right. So the next one is in December. We are all full up of storytellers. It's called These Dreams is the theme. The next one that we need storytellers for is February. It's going to be part of the Big Sky Documentary Film Festival. The theme is adventure. So if you want to tell a story then, shoot us an email from the tellussomething.org website, and we'll get you signed up. There are also donation jars at the front and the back doors here. If you decide that this is worth your while, drop a couple dollars in those jars. All right. I love that there's a child down here who's not screaming and yelling. This is great. Ashley. Ashley's wife texted me today. She's like, "You really didn't put her on the docket, did you?" No. Next up is No. Josh Wagner is a novelist and playwright, usually based out of Montana. He is thrilled to be participating in Tell Us Something for the second time and to be a part of this year's Festival of the Book. In fact, this Friday, that's tomorrow, Josh will be reading from his book, Smashing Laptops. It's a novel about Missoula, as well as his upcoming novel, Shapes the Sunlight Takes, at Shakespeare and Company. That's tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. His production company, Viscosity Theater, will be performing their latest show, Mystery Mark, which is a mindfuck. It's so cool. Throughout the day on Saturday at the Yellowstone Glacier Room in the Holiday Inn, and it's all free, of course. Please welcome Josh Wagner.
So this is a thing that I carry around with me all the time. Not this exact one, but I always have one or two receipts in my wallet. They're good for taking notes, jotting down inspiration, maybe somebody's phone number. Receipts do not have a very glamorous life. They are manufactured, put on a roll, shoved in a box, sent off to some sort of retail store where they're shoved into a machine, printed on, ripped out, handed to somebody who probably throws them away, or at best puts them in an envelope somewhere. And if they're really lucky, in a few years, they're pulled out and analyzed by an IRS agent. Not very glamorous. But I knew a receipt once that had a very interesting day. This was in 1999 in India, where I was traveling. A very lucky young man to be traveling in India. And one thing about India is they have a very different concept of personal space and privacy. I remember walking through the streets, and whole crowds of people would be staring at me as I walked by. And this apparently is just what happens. And eye contact is huge, and personal contact is huge over there, which is really interesting and good and challenging. But it gets exhausting, especially for an introvert, which I am. And particularly with the street vendors, who will often chase you down blocks past their shop to convince you that you need to come back and buy what they're selling. And this became very exhausting and draining over a few weeks until I was pretty much just over it. And one particular day, I was walking down an arcade where it was like a flea market. There were just shops on both sides. And I'm walking through the middle, and I'm just getting, sales pitches lobbed at me left and right. And every step I take, I feel my energy draining, and I feel my immune system collapsing until I'm just this, blob at the end of the thing. But the last guy, the last vendor, he's selling jeans. And it was the first time I'd seen jeans being sold in India. So I was kind of curious, and I look, and I stop, and that was my mistake. Because you look and you stop, and it's all over. And this guy's talking to me, he's pitching me, and I'm trying to find a way to disengage, and I'm just
ugh, what am I going to do? So I decide, okay, I will buy something. So I'm going to buy the cheapest thing here, and it's that scarf. And I pay him, he puts it in the bag, and he starts writing a receipt, which is also a little odd for India at that time. I'm not sure how it is now, but it was the first time someone had given me a receipt. And I think it was all part of his plan, because the longer he can keep me there, the more he can sell me other things. Because as he's writing this receipt, he keeps on pitching this pair of pants. You know, you've got to get these jeans, you've got to get these jeans. And I'm just, as I said, I'm over it, and finally I just looked at him and said, hey, I don't have any legs. And he stops, and he totally shuts up. And I can see the wheels turning in his head. But he stops long enough, I can grab the bag, and I can grab the receipt, and I just get out of there as fast as I can. And I'm 5 or 10 paces down the street, and I hear him say, yes, you do have legs. Now, from an outside observer, this all has to look very strange, because there's a foreigner running away from a vendor who's yelling at him, and he's carrying a bundle. And this must look a little bit nefarious, especially to the police officer who had just come around the corner. So he gets in front of me, and he stops me. He starts speaking to me in Hindi, which I don't understand, and he doesn't understand English. And I'm really nervous, because a few days ago I had been in an auto rickshaw that had driven past a checkpoint, and apparently you're supposed to stop, but he didn't. So the cop in the checkpoint flagged down another rickshaw, chased us down, pulled us over, dragged the driver out, and he pulls out his baton, and he starts like trying to hit him in the ass, and the guy's running around like this, you know. So I'm a little nervous about this officer who's towering above me, and all I can think to do is just hold my receipt out. And he takes it, and he looks at it, he just kind of shrugs, gives it back to me, and walks away. And I'm thinking, this is my lucky receipt. So I fold it up, and I put it in my wallet. Now, at the end of the day, I'm on the bus, ready to get away from people. I'm headed home, and a young woman gets on the bus, and she sits kitty corner from me. And this young woman is devastated. I don't know why. Some tragedy has happened, but you can just tell immediately. The energy changes as soon as she enters the bus. She's focused on just nothing. There's this nothing point in front of her, and that's what she's focusing on. And she's sitting down, staring, catatonic, lost in her pain. And I mean, at one point, a tear falls off her face and hits her knee, and she doesn't flinch, she doesn't move, she doesn't wipe her eyes. That's how deep she is in this. And I'm moved, of course, desperately moved to do something, but I'm over people. So I think to myself, okay, well, I guess I'll write her a note. So that's my plan. I'm going to write, try to say something uplifting, and I don't have any paper except for this receipt. So I pull it back out of my wallet, and I get my pen, and I write something, and it's really horrible. It's really just cheesy. Something about tomorrow's joys sprouting from today's sorrows or something. It's bad. But for that moment, for that woman on that bus, on that receipt, it's the truth. So I write it down, and I hope that she either reads English or has someone who can translate. And when the bus stops, she gets off, I follow her off, and I say, excuse me, this is for you. And I hand her the note. She looks at it. She's confused. She kind of smiles. And again, I'm an introvert, so I turn around and walk away as fast as I can. And at 5 or 10 paces, I start to feel this weird electric thrill coming up my legs, into my torso, and into my arms, and it's like shooting out my fingertips. And I don't even know what I'm feeling, but I'm so amped at that moment that as I walk through the crowd, I am the one making eye contact. I am catching people's eyes, and I am just absorbed in everybody around me. And I literally feel like I'm reading their thoughts and that they're reading my thoughts. And what has happened is I've just emotionally connected with a total stranger. And this has somehow jacked me into this empathy switchboard in some sort of like cosmic computer. And I am completely absorbed in this network, and it's something that I never knew existed, but which I now realize has always been present and open and available to me everywhere I go and every time I see another person. Of course, I never saw this girl again, but I don't know if the note had any impact on her life, but as you can see, it completely changed mine, and from then on, I have always carried a receipt or two in my wallet, just in case.
Thank you, Josh. So let's all get our receipts at the end of the night and carry them around, just in case. I want to really say a big, huge thank you to Kim Anderson. Kim Anderson and Humanities Montana. All the staff there deserves a huge round of applause and all of our respect for 15 years of Festival of the Book. This is the last year they're putting it on. And that doesn't mean it's over. We're really optimistic that it's going to continue, and I totally understand why they're passing the torch. But just thank you to Kim Anderson and the Festival of the Book so much for bringing this amazing event to Missoula. Thank you to every single storyteller that came up here tonight. Thank you to all of you for listening so attentively. Thank you to the bookstore at the University of Montana, Fact and Fiction Books, Rock and Rudy's, Haley Faust, Zoo City Apparel, anybody else that I might have forgotten, Joyce. Joyce, my wife, is so awesome and so understanding. Give it up for Joyce, Jesus. And the Top Hat, thank you so much, so much. Please, if you have a couple dollars, throw it in the donation jar. Subscribe to the podcast. That's one of the best ways you can support us if you don't have a couple dollars for the jar. Like us on Facebook and Twitter. We'll see you in December. Thank you so much.